Hi, I'm Virginia Eskin. I'll be your host for the First Ladies of Music. This is an exciting series that is devoted to women composers. We hope you'll join us. When it comes to the subject of women in music, there's a lot of question, were there any important women? Were there any important composers? Well, our series is not going to address whether there were good ones or not. Of course there were. We're going to share with you the incredible riches of the women we happen to know about, and there's a great deal of interest in trying to understand why we know so little about women in music. We certainly know about women in art, we know about women in science. Why so much gray area about women composers? Now, when you get into the function of what music was supposed to be in the earliest of times, of course, music had many, many important uses. Women used it when they were giving birth. Midwives would sing to ease the pain. Women also used to lament by singing songs when they lost their husbands and brothers in war. Of course, we know that there are wonderful lullabies. When you think of the power that women have had over the years, music was a profound part of the daily life, and women folded it into their lives as importantly as eating, gathering food, giving birth, building gardens. We know that from the earliest time, women played instruments, women sang, and women composed music. The question then immediately pops up, what happened to all of that music? Why do we not know what it sounds like? So our series is going to focus on the role of women in music and the incredibly rich history that women have had in the composition of music from earliest times. We hope you'll come along for the ride. The first woman of interest in this exploration of women who created music is the early Greek poet Sappho. We know that she wrote poetry, but what may not be as well known is that she set her own words to music. This music is not preserved, but the poetry is. Sappho writes, "To me he seems equal to gods, the man who sits facing me. He laughs enticingly. It startles my breast. My tongue is broken, and a fire suffuses my skin. My eyes see nothing. Ears are buzzing. I'm covered in sweat. I'm trembling. I'm paler than grass. I'm short of breath." Music held a place of profound importance in life from earliest times, since it was used to ease or enhance almost all of life's activities. Women were, and are, 50% of the population, so it figures that they would be part of the creation of music. And women certainly were actively creating music in the Middle Ages. You just heard music composed by Hildegard von Bingen. Now, Hildegard was an abbess, but I like to think of her as a CEO in terms of her ability to manage people and involve herself in politics and the secular world as well. And she had great respect as a spiritual leader. She was famous for her prophecies and miracles, and late in her life she undertook 4 preaching missions. That was very unusual for a woman. She was a woman of religious conviction, and the musical settings she made of her own poetry began around 1140. The music is not drawn from plain chant, and in some respects it's highly individual and often complex, filled with long melismas and sequences. The music of Hildegard has become very popular in the last 15 or 20 years, and she is seen as one of the most important early composers, male or female. What is a miracle is that Hildegard was allowed and sanctioned. This is happening at a time when Pope Gregory VII, in about 1100, is fulminating, and he's good and upset at the corruption he sees in the church, and he blames women. In fact, he demands that priests not get married and certainly not have children. Once women were not allowed access to literacy or learning the alphabet, then they became enslaved. And it's interesting that somebody as powerful as Hildegard was being very productive at the same time that the church was also really muzzling women. In fact, women's musical activity was so kept under the radar that even today, when you see Anonymous, that little ANON sign, listed as the composer of a medieval work, could be a little motet, or all the music that was used in the church, there's a good chance that it was composed by a woman. I'd like to share a very interesting canon that Anne Boleyn, who was one of the wives of Henry VIII, composed. She was supposed to have been writing this while she was awaiting to be beheaded in the Tower. What Anne Boleyn does in this little canon is very sophisticated, especially for 1536. What interests a musician, and particularly the listener, is the fact that she plays around with major and minor. So how can this canon, which is all about my death, let the weary, guiltless ghost out of my woeful breast, I must die, I must die. This is not a happy song. So why does she go to the major? She does that because it's brighter. She sets the mood. Then the singer comes in, "Oh, death!" And Anne Boleyn, to underscore this, changes the harmony from being doleful and minor. All of a sudden, why does she do that? She does that because she wants to tug at our ear. Oh, death! And then she goes back to the minor. So she's making it much more interesting than a normal little canon would be. Let's listen to Neva Pilgrim, soprano, and Edward Smith on harpsichord sing Anne Boleyn's "O Death, Rock Me Asleep."
Asleep.
We just heard Neva Pilgrim singing and Edward Smith on harpsichord, Anne Boleyn's Little Canon, O Death, Rock Me Asleep. We're going to move now to the Renaissance. What a wonderful time it was in civilization. Women were encouraged in all fields, and especially in Italy, it seems like there's women just jumping off the pages of history. They're allowed to sing, they're allowed to rule. We have the Medici family, we have Isabella of Castile, we have Eleonora of Aragon. For women performers, I think it was a very rich time. An important woman from the Renaissance period is Francesca Caccini, lived from 1587 to 1640. She came from a family of musicians. They traveled around, they made it all the way up to Paris from Italy. Her singing impressed the king there so much that he wanted to keep her. But the Florentine court wouldn't release her, and she entered into the service of the Medicis in 1607. And this, of course, was a very good thing. She marries and she continues this excellent career. She even goes and performs in Rome for a cardinal. She's busy composing sacred and secular music. This is interesting. She was hired not only by the church for the liturgical music, but she obviously knew how to perform and delight in a more public setting. She got married twice. She married wealthy men. She managed estates, and that reminds us a little bit of Hildegard. Francesca Caccini was the first woman in history to compose opera. La liberazione di Ruggiero, or The Liberation of Ruggiero, was written while she was in the service of the Medici family. In fact, she was the highest paid musician in their service. It was first performed in Florence for the Carnival in 1625. Unfortunately, this is the only one of her operas that survives. Here are two sections of Francesca Caccini's opera La Liberazione, performed by Martine Johns, mezzo-soprano, Michael May, harpsichord, Yvonne Cable, cello, and the Vieuxtemps string quartet.
Chi cielo in mare oggi destina all'alta tua valore egual in terra piaciati d'ascoltar come Ruggiero gli amore abbandonò tempi alti
Francesca Caccini's opera, La Liberazione, we heard two sections performed by Martine Johns, mezzo-soprano, Michael May, harpsichord, Yvonne Cable on cello, and the Vieuxtemps String Quartet. Let's listen to a charming little aria by Francesca Caccini that describes the burning of love. Whoever desires to know what love is, it's all about burning, pain, fear, fury, performed by soprano Carol Plantamura with the Baroque Spanish guitar, played by Jürgen Hubschker, viola da gamba, played by Beverly Lauritsen. Chi desia di saper che cos'è amore.
Chi desia di saper che cos'è amore, io dirò che non sia se non ardore, che non sia se non dolore, che non sia se non timore, che non sia se non furore. Io dirò che non sia se non adore, chi desia di saper che cos'è amore. Chi mi domanderà s'amor io sento, io dirò che mio fuoco in tutto spento, che non provo più tormento, che io non tremo né pavento, che io non vivo ancor contento. Io dirò che mio fuoco in tutto spento, chi mi domanderà s'amor io sento. Chi mi consiglierà che debba amare, io dirò che non può più sospirare, né che bere né sperare, né avancare né gelare, né languire né pennare. Io dirò che non può più sospirare, chi mi consiglierà che debba amare. Chi d'amor crederà dove gioire, io dirò che più dolce amor fuggire, né piegarsi sul desire, né tentar suoi sdegno e dire, né provare il suo martire. Io dirò che più dolce amor fuggire, d'amor crederà dolce gioire.
Now here's another interesting Renaissance woman, Barbara Strozzi, lived from 1619 to 1664. She came from Venice. She was considered a most virtuosic singer. She was the adopted daughter of the poet Giulio Strozzi, and while she never performed or composed opera and she didn't sing in public, she would sing for her father's salon. He would invite poets and artists, and they would come over to his house, and she would entertain them. Here are two delightful pieces by Barbara Strozzi. The first is a madrigal, Tradimento, sung by soprano Carol Plantamura, Baroque Spanish guitar played by Jürgen Hubschker, and the viola da gamba is played by Beverly Lauritsen. And if I hadn't told you that the word means betrayal, you'd figure it out, because in the music there's a lot of moaning and groaning. The singer is good and upset, and you can hear it. And then the next little piece is just the opposite. It's an arietta, Miei, Pensieri, which just means many thoughts, performed by the soprano Roberta Invernizzi and the ensemble Bizzarre Armoniche.
Tradimento, 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 tradimento. Amore e la speranza voglion farmi prigioniero, e a tal segno il mal s'avanza, il mal s'avanza. Troppo
That was two pieces by Barbara Strozzi. You're listening to First Ladies of Music with Virginia Eskin over the WFMT radio network. Welcome back to First Ladies of Music. We're going to leave the Renaissance and move right up into the music of the court, really. Our woman is Maria Ana Martinez, who lived from 1744 till 1812. It's a pretty long life. She lived in Vienna, and even though music had a limited use in the church, the fact was that women by this time have become proficient organists, composers, and especially up in France and England, and even in Germany in the Esterházy court, Salzburg, women are being heard, and they certainly are major performers. We know that in Mozart's time, a lot of his concertos are dedicated to women. She seems to have been a wonderful keyboardist, and I will share with you a little bit of a sonata that she wrote for keyboard in just a minute. She takes what was sort of a static form in a sonata. For instance, I will demonstrate the way she uses embellishments. She puts them in odd places. She's adorning the music in a very delightful way. Do you hear what I mean? She's breaking all the rules. She's so impassioned. The music is just sort of running away with itself, which is a very feminine thing. Maria Martinez's Sinfonia in C. And I just love the way it sounds. It's so spirited, and the way she sort of spells out the embellishments. You'll hear what I mean. It's played by the Bay Area Philharmonic, Joanne Falletta conducting. Maria Martinez's Sinfonia in C, played by the Bay Area Philharmonic Joanne Falletta conducting. We've chosen a work by Fanny Mendelssohn as the theme for First Ladies of Music, and I thought you might like to hear the whole thing. This is one of the Songs Without Words by Fanny Mendelssohn. It's Opus 5, number 4. Now we move to ragtime. And there's a whole story that's really interesting in connection with the ladies who composed rag music. First of all, they were proper ladies, they were classically trained, and they weren't supposed to be writing this kind of music in the first place. It's been an interesting research project to try and find these rags because oftentimes they're buried under a man's name, or sometimes the woman would compose a rag with a name that didn't even belong to her. I'd like to explain, for those of you who don't know what a rag is, it's an interesting sandwich of two things that happen in music. Well, what happens is that you have a very steady bass, usually a march, on the bottom, and then you marry that to a very unsteady top part in the right hand. The synergy that happens by doing that is delicious. Well, we're going to end our program with a famous one called Pickles and Peppers. It was composed by Adaline Shepard. It was used in the presidential campaign by William Jennings Bryan. I hope you enjoyed this first program of our series as we begin to explore the really undiscovered treasures of music composed by women. At the beginning of today's program, I threw out the idea that women held a place of importance at the beginning of music history, that their work was music for all of life's important happenings, such as birthing, putting children to sleep, laments for funeral rites and mourning, and many other events. As we will see, there are many things necessary for any composer, but especially for a woman to succeed. She needs family support, patronage, talent, that's a given, and just plain old luck. But there are many women composers who were active and even famous in their time. Why don't we know more about them? Well, for one reason, it's that their music is hard to find or is just not available. It's not in libraries. It's great fun for us to research this music and find it, and we hope to continue to share with you music that you may not have heard by composers that you may not know of. I'm Virginia Eskin. Please join me next time for First Ladies of Music. First Ladies of Music with Virginia Eskin is produced by Carolyn Pollan for the WFMT Radio Network. Steve Robinson is the executive producer. The engineer is Mary Mazurek. Thanks to Alice Abraham, librarian at WGBH Radio in Boston. And special thanks to Boston's Northeastern University for their generous support. I'm Virginia Eskin, inviting you to join me again next time for First Ladies of Music. This is the WFMT Radio Network.